Alright, I just wanted to make a quick video on the pattern of the coyote fur hat. These are all the patterns that I've used thus far. So far it's been pretty accurate. I just want to go through some of the measurements of all the patterns. Okay, well, let's just start with the top of the hat. The top of the hat is basically a pillbox style hat, and all the banding goes around the circle itself. Okay, my head size measured 22.5 inches. Now, how I got this measurement, you can either use a band of tape. All I did was use a string, take the tip of the string, wrap it around just above the ears and just above the eyebrows, all the way around your head. And then once I had that measurement, so approximately just a piece of string, and then I just took a tape measure and I just measured across, and that's what came up with my measurement of the diameter of my head. Okay, so I got 22.5 inches, and then I extended 22.5 inches to 23.5 inches just for comfort, seam allowance, and all that, and whatever line of material that goes inside of the hat. Alright, and then all I did was divide that. I have some numbers written down here. You probably are not going to be able to see this, but I divided that by pi and times it, and it came out with 7.48 inches diameter. Now, if you wanted to leave, say, 2 inches of comfort allowance, that would probably be a good idea too. When I made my hat, I went with 7.48, which I rounded up to 7.5. It fits perfect as is without the liner inside. Right? It's a little bit loose, but it could be a little bit looser because I wanted to add the underbelly of the coyote, which is a nice white, for the interior, but I'm afraid that if I add that, it might be too tight. I could be wrong, but it might be too tight. So I'm just probably just going to use a nice thinner material, and in the long run, it's probably a better option because this is going to be a smoking hot hat. So if I had 2 fur linings on that hat, it'd be super hot. I'd be sweating constantly. So I have no idea what kind of material I'm going to put in there quite yet. I have to hit the Fabricland or some other place just to see what they have. But so far it fits perfectly. So if you have a 22.5 inch head, allow for an inch seam allowance and comfort. That's 23.5. Now if I wanted to add an extra 2 inches, what some people do advise, then what you're looking at is, I'll take you through some quick math here. It's going to add quite a bit of a diameter. Well, not huge, but it's going to add 1/8 of an inch to either side, right? Let's see if I can get that on the phone here. So what I did, how I got my calculation, if you could see this, so I took 23.5 and then I divided that by pi and times that, and that came up with that number right there. So I just rounded that off to 7.5. Now if you took that same number and it was 24, here I'm going to clear it one more time. If I took that to 24.5 and I divided that by pi and times it, that's 7.8 inches. Okay, now how that actual relates to the size of this hat, let's see if I can get it a little bit closer here. Okay, how that actually relates is, look at the size of this circle, which is your top template. Alright, so 7.8, well, that's 3/4 right here. right? So you're going to add 1/8 of an inch right there. So it's 13/16, so 7 13/16. So you're adding that much. I hope you can see that. It's going to be adding this much to the hat, which isn't probably that bad. But the hat's already humongous. I just don't really know if I'd want to add any more size to it. But it's whatever's, you know, it's all to the person, right? If you're, you know, 6'5", 300 pounds, this hat's gonna look small. But I'm 6 feet tall, and I'm what, 180, so it's a little bit of a different size difference. So I chose the 7.5, but not a big deal. But everything's measuring up perfectly so far. I couldn't be happier with the layout of the hat so far. But that's how I got the measurement here. Now, how I got a perfect circle. Okay, so you got to make sure that you have. Now, is this actually in frame here? I'm going to pan out. Okay. Let's pan out a little bit more. So I took a perfect circle, and how I got that, see, the measurements are 7.5 all the way. Every single pie has 7.5. All I did was I drew a square, a perfect square, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5 up and to the sides, right? You want to make sure that you have a square when you're making these measurements. You want to make sure that you have a perfect 90 when you're drawing that square, right? Because if you don't have a perfect 90, you're not going to get a perfect circle. Okay? So make sure that you have 7.5 here, 7.5 there, and going up. Then how you get the circle, well, what's half of 7.5? Alright? So 3.75. So I take 3.75 from the top corner and measure it to this point. Okay? Double check your work by taking the bottom corner and measuring 3.75, and keep on doing that all the way across, right? And over. And then draw your line at 3.75 all the way across, 3.75 from the top to the bottom. That's going to get your center point. Okay? That's perfect center, right? Then you're going to be taking your compass, wherever I could find that, wherever I put that. There we go. You're going to be taking your compass and making sure that you find your halfway mark. This isn't set to where I want it, but you just draw your circle all the way around it. Okay? And that's what you're going to be doing, is drawing your circle from the center point. And then you got your perfect circle for the top of your hat. Alright, now setting that aside, the next step is going to be your banding for the top of your hat. Okay, now with this banding, well, you're thinking, okay, well, it's going to be 23.5. That's going to be my number. But one thing that we have to take in consideration is there's going to be 3 of these bands, okay? Now with 3 of these bands, there's going to be 3 seam allowances of approximately 1/4 of an inch. So which my measurements came out to 24 3/16. Should have been 24 1/4, but not a big deal. A 1/16 out, not a huge deal. So, and it also depends, are you actually taking that 1/4 inch of seam allowance? Or are you going a little bit more, or are you going to be less? So try to be as accurate as possible, because then also the banding is going to be a little bit longer or shorter from the end, so you're going to be stretching or kind of like back stitching a little bit to make sure it bunches slightly, to make sure it all meets. But with the banding, it worked out perfect, and I didn't have to do any of those. So these two worked out great. So for the size of my head, which is 22.5 inches in diameter, 23.5 worked out. Then next from the pattern, is the ear flaps and the backing. All right. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that I had, well, it wasn't too hard to figure out. It was basically your sides of your eyes, right, which are going to be right over here. So how far do you want these ear flaps to actually get in the way of your vision? So it worked out great because the seam allowance, the banding worked out perfect to where the seam met up with the next band, and that was perfect for the for your line of vision. And then I just kind of measured all the way along here to where the other seam met, and that worked out to be approximately 17.5 inches. So we're going here. So I had to measure out, okay, well, how long do I want this? So it's approximately 17.5 inches in length. All right. These ear flaps, I wanted to be 4 inches across. Okay. Now, you got seam allowance over here because when the lining is going to be meeting the ear flap from the exterior, there's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. There's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance here when the banding meets the ear flap, and so forth, all the way across. So that's why it's ended up being 17.5. I just rounded out the edges. I just cut a rectangle, same as this, just a little wider. And then all I did was took my compass, okay, and just drew all the way around. All right. And cut them out. The bandings are 4 inches by 8 and 1/16 of an inch. Ear flaps are 4.5 by 8.5. I had to cut the middle part of the ear flaps in half because the way the grain direction of the fur and the lack of fur that I was coming to, I had to cut it in half because I couldn't get one strip along the coyote with all the fur going down. So I had to cut it in half and kind of piece it together and sewed it. 4 1/4 by approximately 4.5. Same thing with this one. 4.5 wide by 8.5 long. 8.5 long by 4.5 wide. So those are the measurements. But to draw all these templates or these patterns, make sure you have a good trusty square. Because without this, you're not going to be able to have this accurate because you need a 90. If you don't have your 90, I'm not sure what this hat would have looked like without it. It wouldn't have been very pretty at all, actually. So do your math and make sure that you're just patient with it. It's just, I've been piddling around with this for over a week now. Just, get off from work, you spend an hour, cut out some fur, measure a template. It's just a labor of love. It's something to do. And then what I'll do is I'll put up a video of this sewing all next, just to make sure that everybody knows what that's all about as well. Alright, thanks a lot.